That was rich. That is really good to know that that level of thinking is going on. And I forgot to mention that Mildred Chua-Ulger, who is one of our board members and with Mott MacDonald, is going to be joining the panel. So Mildred and David, David's with the Innovyze, which is owned by Autodesk. And he is, I said before, the American Society of Engineers, ASCE, Civil Engineers, liaison to ISO 55000, and he's an ALN Senior Fellow. Mildred is also ALN Senior Fellow. And then Michael's going to be on the panel, and Rashmi Jain is with Montclair University, and she is a systems engineer extraordinaire. So I look forward to this panel.
Well, thank you. And again, I think it's a small enough group that in addition to the panel, we want to welcome questions from you and have a discussion with you as well. So please, make some notes, and we'll definitely be opening it up to the floor. David, I mean, it was kind of your idea to pull this, to recommend to the ALN as part of your role to kind of look at this framework, and you participated in helping develop the framework itself. You worked on the workshop. So what was your motivation? What was your thought when you made the recommendations?
Yeah.
All right. All right, there we go. Okay. Well, I think, the interest, having been I guess, a practitioner of asset management in a municipal utility, that there was always this mixture, and it was actually a multi service utility. So we're mixing energy, water all the time. We were municipally owned. We served the ratepayers. And so there's always this mixture of that social good. There was the mixture of the different utilities, the technology, the regulations. We were under a consent decree on the sewer side. So there's, that sort of massive environment. What really saved us, I think, at that utility was deploying asset management. And so when called upon to work with the New York Academy of Sciences and the New York Metropolitan, I mean, we all, whenever we want to understand the complexity of infrastructure, we always use that, that Google image of infrastructure under New York Street, right? I mean, it's just so complex. And so I couldn't imagine the magnitude of tackling all that and making sense where it was actually, digestible. And so seeing the activity, the workshops, that it was all coming together, it just made a lot of sense then to kind of use that framework, because we all operate under regulations. We have the laws, we have standards, which American Society of Civil Engineers, that's, we're very much a standards body, an educational body, but it's frameworks that pull that all together. And so that's what really attracted me to bring that to kind of this forum and start to use it in the context of asset management.
And you brought a lot of perspective to that, and that during the workshops, I remember. Mildred, you were a MTA employee at the time. And so just from kind of your role as an asset owner, and a particularly complex asset owner, remind you that the MTA's value of its built assets is over $1 trillion right now. And that doesn't include the value of the right-of-ways. So what's your perspective on the value of the framework?
So I was really excited when you asked the MTA to join the group.
I don't think your mic's on. No, use below. Yeah, that's it.
No. Oh, okay, there you go. There you go. Oh my God, I'm not going to talk too loud. So basically, we were really excited to join this project because, when Michael was there, he had began the development of this framework at the capabilities level. As you could see, this framework is at multiple levels, different dimensions of people, process, technology, systems, data, right? All being, integrated together under one framework. So the capabilities model was at least in place at a very basic level when Michael left. And so we really continued to advance it after he retired. And through many changes at New York MTA, I mean, it's extremely also a political organization. The governor of New York and the mayor of New York City came out with like a 10-point plan of a historic reorganization mandate for New York MTA. And it had to be done in 12 weeks. So you could imagine that, you know, where do you begin to even understand such a complex organization to come up with a plan? And so we put this forward. At the time, I was asked to lead the transformation efforts. And I said, look, we already have a framework in place. We know what this organization looks like, how it does business. It's not complete. It's at the very basic level right now of capabilities, and some systems have been mapped to it. Some processes have been mapped to it. But, you know, we can keep taking it forward. So the 12-week transformation planning process was actually doable because the consultants that came on board really went in and learned the organization through this lens, and it was really comprehensive. So the consolidation plan that was developed and the blueprint for the new transformed MTA was really very good. And people were shocked to see that in 12 weeks, so much was actually accomplished by the MTA. And I think it's thanks to having something like this as foundational that existed. So that's why I was, you know, really happy that, you know, we participated in this. We were able to continue moving it forward. And now it's being built even more at every different layer and continuously being connected at process, at systems, at, you know, data layers. It's really incredible. Michael was there recently, I believe,
Yes.
and you saw that even at the process level, Six Sigma, they were really populating this model and they were continuing the work that we've started.
Yeah,
So-
I came back, I went back to the MTA 4 years after I retired, and I go to the board room, and the room's filled with about 70 people, and they were doing a Six Sigma workshop, which I had helped initiate the Six Sigma program. And so they were all very actively doing business process reengineering at the elemental level. And Mildred will tell you that she would have to quantify the value of that. And she said that that Six Sigma program had $45 million of direct savings to the MTA's budget. And that was only the stuff that it was able to quantify. As you know, you can't quantify everything, so the impact had been massive. And those Six Sigma work was directly tied to the capabilities modeling. And the beauty of it, I guess, is the stability. So the capabilities model and the six-box model are extraordinarily stable. The transformation happens underneath it. So you have both stability and change, which is a very difficult thing to achieve. And I think that's why these practices really matter, Rasmin. No, we were blessed in this exercise to really have some really brilliant systems engineers and enterprise architects advising us. So really, how does enterprise engineering and enterprise architecture help both with stability and change? And then what do you see in mature organizations that you don't see in immature organizations? And I guess put it in the context, of course, of the framework, participation in the framework.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with so many of you, you know, who bring many years of rich experience from the asset management perspective. And thanks to ALN for putting this together. You know, when I look at my first experience of looking at New Jersey and the complex infrastructure, that was when Jerry, myself, and a few of us did the work for securing ports of New York and New Jersey. And this was
years ago, right?
Yeah, that was 2 decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, amazing that how we looked at every, you know, bridge and tunnel and the ports and the container cargo and all of that. So I think to your point about what's the difference between a mature organization in terms of how they look at asset management versus those who are in the process of figuring it out. I mean, I've been a systems architect for almost 3 decades, starting with Accenture. So graduating from Stevens Tech, I joined Accenture and realized that architecture is the only way to have stability because it provides you the kind of a floor design that you can work with in scaling up, scaling down, understanding where your weaknesses are. You cannot go directly into design and implementation. So architecture allows you to think through where are the constraints we have. So I think one of the constraints that you pointed out and that we have addressed in our layered architecture framework as part of our New York Science Academy work is that regulations and compliance and standards is the major aspect. We don't realize this because you think, oh, compliance, it will go in the design, in the implementation. It cannot. It has to be at the architecture level. So I think companies which have figured it out, like the Lockheed Martins of the world, and at a federal level, I mean, I worked closely with NSA and even did teaching of systems architecting and at the Air Force bases overseas, UK and other places. You realize that, luckily I'm also an information systems, expert and professor. So organization strategy that really spells out how information systems and technology infrastructure is going to be leveraged has to spell out an organization design and governance structure that will help you support that architectural perspective. I mean, I know there are so many of those charts that we use in Systemigram. And that really translates into what kinds of solutioning you are going to do, right? I mean, you cannot go bottom up in this. I know in the agile world, we say, oh, it's both bottom up and top down. But really, I think having that perspective that strategically we know what are our goals and what is our vision, and then you develop the architecture and the governance structure to support it and go for the technology solutions that go with it. So, I mean, I don't know if that's, it's a lot to be captured in from that perspective. So just since Patrick brought the example of deep water horizon, and I've used that as a case study in many of my engineering classes, and you all probably read the report, right?
Or saw the movie.
So, a lot of the AI solutions and Mike, we don't use the word AI, but we use IoT so the difference between what we used to do in systems engineering, I would say 5-10 years ago, and now is that we were good at simulations, meaning that we knew the variables that we want to play with. But AI has allowed us to go above and beyond because now the system is learning by itself. The more data you feed, the more good quality data you feed. So I think something like deep water horizon would not happen if you had AI as part of the IoT, right? And yesterday, Richard, you were mentioning about China and its infrastructure, and I don't know if I mentioned, but another case study that we use is the Three Gorges Dam, right? And there was so much rainfall in the last I don't want to take away all the time, but the natural disasters happening all over because of the global warming. And this is really going to be an important aspect and the natural context of, so Three Gorges Dam was built for, I think, 98.8 million liters of water every second, right? It's the largest installed capacity of hydroelectricity, by the way, right? And the people were really concerned what is going to happen. And obviously it is designed for 175 million liters per second kind of a water volume to handle. Anyway, I mean, there are so many of these examples that really highlight what a good system architecting means. Infrastructure architecting versus not so good, how we use or deal with the life cycle issues of, for example, nuclear power plant used rods. What do we do with them? Have we really, did we look at it when we did the systems architecture? Did we provide for evolution of the system as the technology grows?
And this gives you the tools to kind of deal with these levels of complexity. And we're at this kind of tipping point. We know we're at some sort of global tipping point for the planet, for civilization as we know it. So it's in the introduction of really these fourth industrial revolution technologies like AI.
AI and
David,
deep learning, yeah.
in the fourth industrial revolution, they talk about the convergence of physical, digital, and biological systems. And I know you spend a lot of time looking at water systems and things like that, and asset management systems. So talk about kind of that, the level of technology. You're also a technologist. So how does technology help us deal with that complexity that we're talking about? And how does a framework like this help us execute on those technologies?
That's a great question and takes us into so many rabbit holes. You know, and I was kind of looking at, you know, one of your slides that you know, mentioned the different kind of infrastructure, the sustainable and resilient and all the conversations that are going on that, and carbon neutral. You know, what's risen, you know, and I'll kind of get to the AI, but you know, the equity conversation is what's really seems to be driving so much of the conversation in water right now. But you know, as you start looking at these different lenses, one of the things, you know, we kind of have, you know, all these different aspects of the social, the tech, the data, you know, and of course data. Now we got, you know, with the cybersecurity sort of concept. There's all these things that people kind of, you know, get into. But from a technology standpoint, one of the things it's really been interesting. We, you know, comes back to humans. And my company, we have AI solutions, and one of the things that we thought, oh, you know, apply AI and we're going to optimize treatment, you know, asset management, because energy, everyone wants to save money on energy, and everyone's like, you know, with COVID. They said, I got to save chemicals, right? I can't get my chemicals anywhere with supply chain. And that's what the recent rail strike struck fear into every water utility was, my chemicals, you know? And so COVID kind of rewrote the book on almost everything. You know, it catapulted almost every utility into, you know, industry 4.0 with, you know, remote workers. I mean, so they digitalized very quickly just to get work done. But we're starting to overlay then kind of the more hardcore tech, right? So, okay, you know, hooray, you know, you have a remote worker, but there's a lot more than that. And one of the interesting things we've witnessed, you know, with what we do with AI and in the design world, humans have an overlay, you know, as an engineer, we're very symmetrical. And when we start to design parts, we want, you know, right side, left side to be equal. You know, I think we look at ourselves in the mirror, like, oh, my ear's the same, you know, but it's like AI doesn't care. And the designs that are coming out, when you let AI kind of do its thing and learn, you know, you get these very odd spider web like looking thing. You start looking at Mother Nature is like seeking in, and she's been designing things a lot longer than we have, right? And so it's interesting to see how, you know, engineers in this design, we're like, we have these mental constructs, and when we let AI kind of do its thing, it rewrites the book. And so we're finding ourselves in applying technology, what we think, you know, we design something we release a product, and then users find a way, but we're finding all these externalities that are driving tech in different ways we never would have envisioned.
So is AI biophilic? Sounds like it.
Well, you know, now one of the things, you know, that we also recommend, it's interesting when we get into the digital twins and virtualization, you know, the model space, you have to have, in my opinion, you have to have a digital twin. You have to model, because you can't censor everything, right? We censor a portion and we use that to calibrate, right? But what's interesting is even our digital twins that us humans have guided, you know, we still have kind of these constraints. And when we start letting AI creep in, you know, I don't think anyone's ready to let AI take over. We've seen those movies, you know, so, but it is very difficult, as you know, to allow myself to like listen to these unfiltered, it's almost like my grandma, unfiltered comments, on how we should approach things. And so I think, Industry 4.0, I don't know if there's a 4.5 or is this a 3.75, that it's like we need to open up our constraints and let it kind of do its thing and still have that human overlay though, right? We still need to be kind of the one.
We could talk about engineering ethics in a second, but how much time do we have? I'd like to open up the 15 minutes. So why don't we just kind of open up a little bit to the floor to get some questions in? And I have a couple more questions for the panel, but I do want to see if you guys have some thoughts that you want to either contribute or comment. The button below.
It should go red.
Yeah, wait for the red.
It's not the green button, it's the button below it.
Okay, I can see that.
All right.
Thank you for such a fantastic presentation and discussion. I made so many notes, took so many pictures, Michael. I hope your slides will be shared. Two thoughts occurred to me, and I believe they're related. When you're talking about bringing the value and benefits of Industry 4.0 to Infrastructure 4.0, we're a solution provider that sort of straddles industry and infrastructure, and we see a very different rate of adoption. And so one of the things, we particularly work in the water sector, and David, I think you validate this. There is a very conservative, slow approach to adoption of new technologies that can be beneficial. There's a lot of discussion around the endless pilot that never converts into an actual adoption, and the idea of racing to be second. I'm never going to be first and lead the way. So I'd be interested in thoughts on addressing that challenge of adoption of new technology. And then I believe some of the answer is the framework. But then the other challenge in public infrastructure is the sophistication, the level of maturity that you did mention across the managers, the organizations, the municipalities that are managing our public infrastructure. In the water sector, and I am not able to comment or speak to transportation or others, but the majority of the organizations that are managing our public water infrastructure are small. There's about 50,000 water utilities in the United States. 91% of those serve a population of under 10,000 people.
Yeah.
So how do we bring the benefits of this amazing framework to these smaller organizations that represent the majority of our population?
That's a wonderful question. Does anyone want to answer?
Well, as so yeah, great question, and you're exactly right with in water, the small systems, in that, and we had a major conference in Milwaukee prior to this, that was kind of one of the #1 conversations is, this is all great for the big guys, but what about the thousands and thousands of small systems? And this is almost where technology is actually going to come to their aid, if you will, in the context of cloud solutions. And had one gentleman stand up and say, well, I want to run my utility off of this. And we kind of said, well, the easy button doesn't quite exist, but actually the advent of cloud solutions and having standards that have been vetted from organizations like, ASCE, having those standards that have had hundreds of engineers across the country kind of develop a steel-threaded truth of how a utility might operate, how the kind of the mundane aspects, having those embedded in these technologies actually allows the human then to do what the human should be doing and worrying about problems and people, and kind of take away the mundane aspects. And so we do see almost the small systems leapfrogging into cloud technology and mobile because they have to. They don't have the resources. And the big systems are kind of still fighting in silos about, who does what and that sort of thing. So, I see standards and these frameworks being applied from us vendors must take advantage of that and then thread that into the solution. So that it almost gives them this codified workflow and allow them to actually fight the problems of the day, not just, oh, did I dose did I have the right dosage to meet my compliance permit? Those things, automation can very much help that. Now it has to be configured, to the local environments. Every utility has a little bit something different, but I do see small systems leapfrogging the big systems.
I'd like to give, I want to give the floor to Rashmi because that's her job as professor of technology management to think about that. But I want to point out kind of three thoughts. One, first, the power of association. So we talked about the ability of water associations to give the context to help empower small municipals to feel that they can make the leap, that they're not alone in taking the journey. So I think, the theme of this conference is definitely one of the answers to that. We do live in a risk adverse culture, but it's becoming more risky not to act than to act. So the risk of not acting, you put yourself and your organizations and the people that you serve at more risk today. So you're being forced to ask this. And what MacDonald does, and what we talk a lot about, is the capable organization. That our job, as consultants, to ensure that our clients are capable, becoming more and more capable of managing these challenges and have the ability to draw on the resources necessary to make the decisions that they need. And of course, part of that is to help them become better asset managers, because that is a beautiful toolkit for decision making. So I think this ALN network and the IAM and others are really helping with that power of association. And again, there are techniques. I mean, the nice thing about this is teaching them to do. We all have to become technology managers today. That's just part of being in society, even in developing countries. The permutation of this is just massive. But what's your thought on how?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right about the value of associations. And to your question, I mean, I immediately remembered that in the last semester. So I do, as a professor, I am responsible for all the capstone and experiential learning in my program. I think that's probably because once a consultant, always a consultant. And I like to have that industry, industry socializing happening all the time. So one of the projects that a team of our students did, I'm talking about the MS in Business Analytics program. They worked for a municipality to look at the data of water leakage, and you and I know that, and everybody who's worked in the water sector, some of these municipalities are dealing with very bad, leakage. And so they looked at these millions of rows of data. There was, again, not to bore you guys, but what I'm saying is that individual municipalities like to explore and find the problem. And you're absolutely right that we are not ready to hand over to AI, but knowing where to use AI and how to actually do machine learning model and things like that. So the students looked at the data and there were a lot of null values. So it's not about, oh, what do we replace the null value with, like, 0 or 9 or whatever. It was more about finding why those were happening, and you'll be really intrigued to know, like where this data was coming from. So what I'm saying is that helping municipalities understand the problem with the use of technology, but at the same time, letting them have that manual or in-person kind of a intervention where they can see the data, look at the visualizations and dashboards. That's the first step. I think that will help them showcase a success to the board and the leadership. Again, I mean, one small little example. Yeah.
Success will definitely lead to
Yeah.
adoption. More questions, Mike?
I would like to force a question. Doug Wilson is Mott MacDonald's global lead for advisory services, and Mott MacDonald was so core to this. I'd like you to have an opportunity to say some things about the power of this framework.
Delighted to be here. I'm here in a learning exercise today, actually. So I was going to try and stay very quiet. So I've been working with obviously Mike and Mildred, and I've been watching what's developing. I'm a program guy, I'm a projects guy. This is way behind what I normally be doing, but it fits into the suite of services that MacDonald is trying to excel in and develop the opportunity to help organizations realize they can do things differently. I was also intrigued, the word value is part of the theme of this conference today. My extensive experience of 7 months being in the United States, the word value doesn't actually get used very much. We've had 1 or 2 chats about this. Value tends to be driven about what's the difference in cost. So that whole mindset, that whole thinking about what does value mean is part of the challenge. And I think my simple question to the panel is, you've got a lot of cultural mind shift in people to change. The concept of the framework is outstanding. I get it. And one day I'll understand it, but actually it's people that will make it happen. And when I see organizations in the United States, whether it's transport or water, the concept of collaboration between departments and divisions doesn't seem to exist. They are competing. There is almost hatred, that. So when you introduce this whole framework, the only way that framework's going to work in any organization is about collaboration between every function, the whole concept between the corporate and society, etc. So there's a whole bunch of enablers that society or certainly maybe consultants have to help organizations do. So what are the other enablers? How do we get people's behaviors and attitudes changed so that they can extract the value out of the framework of this?
It's good to take a shot and then so that where again, the one slide that intrigued me was, you had the different infrastructures and sustainable, resilient. We're like, okay, I try not to talk about like climate change because that then polarizes, people. And so, but when we say extreme weather, no one can argue that extreme weather isn't happening, right? So you kind of normalize that. And one of the interesting rallying cries about value and humans that's brought to the forefront, definitely in the water industry, is the equitable conversation, right? Because we all said, oh, it's easy. We have a formula, the federal poverty line, X% of customers above or below, that done deal. And that's like, no, that's not the value of humans. And so it's interesting, the conversations we have, the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, we have, New Jersey has the Alice Index, the United Way, we've got the Justice 40 initiatives. And so it's interesting to watch this conversation about equitable infrastructure and disadvantaged communities, because now that funding is tied to that and says you will do these projects based on this lens, and everyone's like arguing even what does that lens look like. And every community, there's some leeway that each community gets to decide what that means for them. But this is the culminating apex of human value discussion, is what is disadvantage. And that changes across the country, just because we have a lot of the ethnic conversations. And even here in the US, our indigenous communities are kind of like, well, we were kind of here first. And what about us? And so they get brought into the conversation as well. And it's a rather, they blow away all tenets of asset management with the fact that we own nothing, right? And so you're like, well, wait a minute, that's a cornerstone of asset management. And they're like, well, you need to rethink that when you bring in natural systems. So that conversation is, I think, the catalyst of where we're going to know whether we succeed or not in this conversation of value.
Yeah, I mean, I just from the perspective of like what we did at New York MTA, right? It's meeting people where they are at, right? The culture needs to be changed, and everybody has a different perception in terms of what needs to be done, and the behaviors are very different across the spectrum. So An example would be, we had the framework, but it could sit on a shelf and be nothing and have no value. How do you keep it going? How do you iterate on it? If you present it to the masses, everybody will look at it and say, I don't know what this is, and I'm walking away. So it takes a core group of people to say, we're going to own this, we're going to maintain this, but then have all those individual conversations. So, and give them something that is what's in it for them. For example, at the operational level, the Six Sigma program, we said we are going to populate the process dimension of this framework, right? By getting people trained in Lean Six Sigma principles. Bring a project as part of your training. You get to map out the process, you get to develop everything, make recommendations, and present to your C-suite person, right? That was an incentive to get certified and be a black belt at some point in time. Present to C-suite, right? And everybody got all excited. So now you have masses, like tons and tons. We have classes of 50 to 100 people, okay, every 6 months, literally taking these courses and bringing real live projects, mapping them straight into this framework, in the system that we have. So the database keeps building, right? So it's maintained that way. You have buy-in. Now, in order to maintain that, though, it costs money, right? It costs money to do training. How do you convince the CFO to say, I'm going to continue to fund this program? And that was one of the key things. They wanted to shut down at one point in time when there was a fiscal crisis during COVID, this program. I went to the CFO and I said, I'm going to pull out 50 projects that have been ongoing. And I'm going to show you what has already been accomplished in terms of the financial plan, linking it directly to the financial plan and saying, I could find you already $45 million over 5 years. It's already programmed in as savings in the plan. Each department has come up with a group of projects. They were never labeled asset management. They were labeled operational initiatives or maintenance efficiencies, right? The word asset management doesn't come about. And that was the miscommunication. So anyway, I think that there is a way to do it that way, through the people and speaking to them in the language that they understand to get them all the buy-in.
This is going too good to stop on schedule, so we got one question and then I'm ready to.
Every time I listen to folks like y'all, I'm thinking, how can this country be in such bad shape with such smart people? And so one of the things that I'm an engineer by training, and I worked for the federal government for quite a long time. And one of the things that we struggled with was how to know if we're doing a good job, right? And so one of the key things in asset management is, are you accomplishing your objectives? And so we would look for simple ways to figure that out, and it turned out that none of them worked. And so we think about so I love scorecards. I love, like the ASCE, infrastructure scorecard. And the question I have is, what do we actually have to do to move the ball? I mean, we know that we've got infrastructure problems across all these sectors. I think we might have improved in a couple of, infrastructure sectors this year, the last scorecard, but only slightly. We might have gotten from a D+ to a C-. But what needs to happen to spread this kind of expertise more widely around the country and know that we're making progress and making things better? How do we do that?
I'm going to challenge each of you to make a one-sentence statement on that, and I'll go first to give you a little bit of time. That's why it's on, because it wasn't. So moving the ball forward is something that the ALN constantly thinks about. And Mildred pointed to something, it's training. And MAP 21 is legislation that requires asset management plans and had $1 million in funding. So if we can replicate that language in all funding legislation, I think that would move the ball forward. Who wants to take the short sentence next?
I can go for the next. Absolutely. I think you're right on the dot, Mike, because that's exactly what, consulting companies like Accenture or MacDonald does is prepare the organization, enable the organization to take it on by not only training individual employees, but helping the C-suite in coming up with a supportive governance structure. And Doug, to your point on, how do you make change happen or how do you get the people excited is about not only the C-suite or the leadership putting money into it or, yeah, we are going to champion it kind of a thing, but show it by setting up a governance structure and allocate the roles and responsibilities and have a monitoring and tracking system, one line.
Of course, an educator is going to say training is important. So I'll put Michael on the spot next, if you can drag the microphone towards you.
Yeah, so, $1.6 trillion is a lot of money. So that's one thing that we can do. And thank God that we've been able to make those decisions as a society. And I think before we spend that money, the biggest leverage point that we have is to establish both a mindset, a vision for how to use that and articulate, again, the purpose of that infrastructure is to enable the flourishing of people and the planet and tie outcomes and measurable outcomes to the release of that funding. I think the final element of that is to change the second biggest leverage point you can have is actually changing the rules. And I think something like asset management does change the rules, but the framework that we're introducing here is a way of kind of rewriting the rules for delivering the outcomes that we need from that $1.6 trillion.
Excellent. David?
6 words. How we know if we're going to succeed would be safe drinking water in Jackson, Mississippi.
Excellent, excellent. The water sector applauds that.
Actually, Mike, just one example of because I'm really sold out to governance. I know that companies in data science area are struggling to figure out what their data scientist and their CIO is going to do. Is FAA, when they went from NAS to Next Gen, they hired a chief architect officer. And I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, right?
Okay.
So.
Everybody should hire a chief architecture officer. And Mildred, our board member and ALS
Yes.
senior fellow, gets to
Strategic asset management, which basically means you have leadership in place and you build your strategies, you understand what your outcomes are. Everything that you do revolves around the services you provide to customers and achieving those outcomes and managing your assets that provide those services in a much better way.